At the dinner table, Afia's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her glass. It was supposed to be a simple family gathering, a rare evening where the past was meant to stay buried. But her sister, Sifa, had other plans. "Remember when Afia got suspended for shoplifting lip gloss at 16? Sifa said, laughing. Everyone went quiet. Afia's smile faded. Even Sifa's husband, Teddy, looked uncomfortable. But Sifa smirked and added, "You always loved drama." Afia locked eyes with her. She had stayed silent for years. She had forgiven. But now, she remembered the folder in her drawer, and the messages, and the fake name Sifa used. Tonight, silence would no longer protect anyone. It was a warm evening meant for smiles and peace. Their father's birthday had brought the whole family together after a long time. Afia had worked extra shifts just to afford the perfect cake, chocolate, his favorite, and she brought it in with quiet joy. She wore a simple dress, nothing flashy, and made sure her makeup was soft and respectful. She even greeted Sifa with a small hug, pretending all was well between them. As everyone settled around the table, laughter filled the room. The clinking of glasses, shared stories, and gentle teasing made it feel like old times. Afia stayed quiet, just happy to see her father smile. She had promised herself she wouldn't let anything spoil this night. But Sifa had a different plan. In the middle of a conversation about childhood memories, Sifa suddenly leaned forward and laughed. "Remember when Afia got suspended for stealing lip gloss in high school?" She looked around like she had just dropped the best joke. The room went still. Afia's smile disappeared. Her heart started to beat fast. She looked at her father, who now stared at his plate, and then at Sifa's husband, Teddy, who shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Sifa chuckled and added, "You always loved drama, didn't you?" Afia said nothing, not because she didn't have words, but because she didn't want to ruin the evening. She had forgiven herself for that teenage mistake years ago. She had paid for it in shame, lost chances, and long nights of guilt. But Sifa knew that, and she used it anyway, as a joke, a weapon, a way to shine in the room. Afia sat still, her fingers lightly holding the edge of her plate. On the outside, she looked calm, but inside, something shifted. Sifa had crossed a line, and for the first time in years, Afia stopped protecting her. The peace she had tried so hard to keep cracked that night, not because Afia was weak, but because silence had become too heavy to carry. She didn't say a word during the rest of the dinner, but her mind was already unlocking a drawer back home, a drawer full of truth that Sifa thought would never see the light. Afia didn't say a single word. She didn't argue, didn't shout, didn't even try to defend herself. She just blinked slowly, forcing a small smile that didn't reach her eyes. Inside, her chest felt tight, but she kept her face still. Everyone at the table thought it was just an old silly story, something to laugh about. They didn't know the weight it carried. They didn't know what that one mistake had cost her. She was just 16 when it happened. A stupid moment, peer pressure, curiosity, whatever you want to call it. She took a lip gloss from a store without paying. She was caught, suspended from school, humiliated. The news spread fast. Even years later, when she applied for jobs, somehow it came up. Some employers found old records. Some heard gossip. She would walk into interviews confident, ready, hopeful, and walk out with empty hands and forced smiles. Again and again. Afia had worked so hard to move past it. She had gone to therapy. She had apologized to her parents. She had cried at night when no one was watching. It took years to rebuild her self-worth, to believe she was more than that moment. And finally, she was starting to feel okay. She was learning to forgive herself, to be proud again. But Sifa knew all of that. She had been there. She had seen the tears, the rejection letters, the job offers that disappeared overnight. Sifa was the one who used to say, "It's okay, Afia. One day, people will forget." But Sifa didn't forget. And worse, she didn't let it go. She held onto it, like a card in her back pocket, ready to throw it on the table when she needed to feel bigger, louder, better. And that's exactly what she did at dinner. She used Afia's lowest point for laughs, for attention, to remind everyone that Afia once messed up, that she had a past, that she wasn't perfect. Afia stared at her plate, not because she was ashamed, but because she was hurt, deeply. It wasn't just the story, it was the betrayal. The way someone you trusted with your pain could turn it into entertainment. She thought she had left that chapter behind, but Sifa reopened it with one sentence and a smirk. Sifa had always been the shining star in the family. People loved to talk about her. She married so well, they'd say. Her husband, Teddy, was calm, respectful, and kind. Their house was big and beautiful, like something from a magazine. 2 lovely children, expensive cars, family vacations to places Afia could only dream of. Sifa always looked flawless, hair done, clothes perfect, smile bright. Everyone believed she had it all. Afia never felt jealous. She had made peace with living a smaller life. She worked hard, paid her bills, and kept to herself. While people praised Sifa, Afia stayed in the background. She never tried to compete. She clapped the loudest when Sifa shared her wins. But still, something didn't sit right. It started small. One night, during a sleepover at Sifa's house, Afia noticed her sister constantly texting. It wasn't work messages. It was late, and Sifa kept smiling at her screen, quickly turning it over when Afia glanced her way. Afia didn't say anything. Then there were the bank transfers. Once, when Sifa asked Afia to help print a few documents, Afia saw something strange. Transactions to a name she didn't know, and large amounts too, always around the same date, every few weeks. When Afia asked about it gently, Sifa laughed and said it was a friend she was helping. But that name, Zanele, it kept showing up. Afia had never heard her sister mention a Zanele. Not once, not in passing, not in any story. The more she paid attention, the more she saw the cracks. Sifa would lie about her location, say she was at a parent-teacher meeting, but Afia would see her tagged at a spa on someone's story. Say she was at a church group, but come home with makeup and a new dress. The little lies started to build up. Afia didn't want to believe it at first. She didn't want to dig into someone else's life, but the signs were too loud. Something about Sifa's perfect life wasn't real, and slowly, Afia began to understand. Sifa was playing 2 roles, the loving wife and mother everyone saw, and someone else entirely, someone who used a different name, someone living a second life. And that name, Zanele, kept following Afia like a whisper she couldn't unhear. She didn't want to judge. She didn't even want to interfere. But after that dinner, after the way Sifa humiliated her in front of everyone, Afia no longer felt the need to stay silent, because now she realized that the same sister who mocked her past was hiding one of her own. Afia never planned to follow her sister. That wasn't her nature. She believed in minding her own business, keeping peace, and letting people live how they wanted. But one afternoon, things changed. She had stopped by a shopping plaza to get groceries, and just as she was walking back to her car, she saw Sifa across the parking lot. At first she smiled, thinking she'd go say hi, but then she paused. Sifa was wearing high heels, a tight dress, and bright red lipstick. Nothing like the casual outfit she had said she'd wear to her ladies' prayer group that afternoon. That alone wasn't a crime, but what made Afia freeze was the black car that pulled up in front of Sifa. It wasn't Teddy's car, and the man who stepped out definitely wasn't Teddy. Afia stood still for a moment, confused. She watched as Sifa smiled, almost glowing, and hugged the man like they had known each other for a long time. Then, to Afia's shock, she heard her sister laugh and say, "I missed you too. Zanele has arrived." Zanele, that name again. Something heavy dropped in Afia's chest. Her heart beat faster. Before she could even think, she quietly got into her car and followed them. She didn't know where she was going. She just knew she had to know the truth. They drove across town to a restaurant by the beach. Fancy, private, the kind of place for secret dates, not family lunches. From her parked car, Afia watched as her sister walked arm in arm with the man, giggling and whispering, completely free. Not like a woman hiding, but like someone who had done this 100 times before. And the man, he looked at her with so much affection, like they shared something deep. Then came the final blow. The waiter walked over, smiling, and asked, "Reservation under Zanele?" Her sister nodded, without hesitation. "Yes, that's me." Afia stared in disbelief. It wasn't a mistake. Her sister really was living a double life, pretending to be someone else, someone named Zanele, while her husband and kids stayed home trusting her. Afia sat in her car for a long time. Everything she thought she knew about her sister began to feel like a lie. The perfect image, the loving mother, the faithful wife, it was all a mask. And now Afia had seen what was behind it. She didn't take any pictures that day. She didn't confront her. She just went home. But her heart was no longer quiet. The truth was now alive inside her, and it was only a matter of time before silence would no longer be enough. Afia was never the type to hold grudges. Even after everything, she still believed in keeping the peace. After the day she followed Sifa and saw her double life, she had come home and quietly started gathering the pieces. Not because she wanted to destroy her sister, but because deep down, she felt she might need the truth one day, not to hurt, but to protect herself. She had saved screenshots, messages that Sifa had accidentally left open once on her tablet, chats with the man named Thabo, full of endearments and private plans. She had photos too, ones she quietly took from her car the day she followed Sifa to the restaurant. Pictures of Sifa holding hands with Thabo, laughing, kissing his cheek, and there were receipts. Hotel bookings under the name Zanele, transfers to strange accounts, even one flight ticket to Durban, all connected to her sister's secret life. Afia didn't want to keep them. She didn't want to look at them, but she couldn't throw them away either. So she placed them all in a folder and pushed it into the back of her drawer. For months, she said nothing. She smiled when Sifa called. She attended family gatherings. She nodded along when everyone praised Sifa's beautiful marriage, even when her father would proudly say, "Sifa is a perfect example for young women." Afia only nodded, biting her tongue. But after that birthday dinner, the one where Sifa dragged Afia's old mistake into the spotlight like it was a joke, something in Afia cracked. That night, she came home, shut her bedroom door, and sat on the floor in front of her dresser. Her hands reached for the drawer almost without thinking. She pulled out the folder. For a few moments, she just looked at it. The manila cover, the slightly bent edges. It felt like it weighed more than it should, because inside wasn't just paper. It was pain, years of secrets, quiet observations, and a truth Afia had tried to bury. But silence, she now realized, had only made Sifa feel stronger. It had fed her pride, made her think she could hurt others and never face consequences. Afia wasn't angry. She was tired of being mocked, tired of protecting people who didn't protect her. That folder wasn't revenge. It was proof that Sifa wasn't as flawless as she pretended, proof that Afia wasn't crazy or jealous. She still didn't know what she was going to do with it, but that night, for the first time, she stopped feeling small, because now she knew the truth was hers, and this time, she wasn't going to be the one hiding. The morning after the birthday dinner, Afia woke up with a heavy heart. Her mind kept replaying the moments Sifa had laughed about her teenage mistake, like it was just a fun story. It wasn't. It was a scar that had taken years to heal. And last night, Sifa had ripped it open again, for nothing more than attention. Afia couldn't stay silent anymore. She sat on her bed, picked up her phone, and recorded a short voice note. Her hands didn't shake. Her voice was calm, but clear. "You've always been better at hiding your sins," she said, "but don't ever weaponize mine again. Or next time, I won't whisper. I'll speak." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. Afia stared at the screen for a few seconds, then pressed send. She didn't expect a reply, and she didn't get one. Hours passed, then days. Sifa didn't mention the message. She didn't call. She acted like nothing had happened. Afia stayed quiet too. She didn't follow up. She didn't send another word. She went about her life, went to work, took care of her plants, read her books. But something inside her had changed. She had drawn a line. She had finally told Sifa enough. Sifa, as always, brushed it off. Maybe she thought Afia was bluffing. Maybe she thought Afia didn't have the courage to speak up. Maybe she was so used to Afia staying quiet that she didn't take the message seriously. She continued posting happy pictures online, baking with her kids, hugging her husband, smiling like her world was perfect. But Afia watched and waited. A week later, there was another family dinner, this time at Sifa's house. Everyone was invited, their parents, cousins, even Teddy's sister from out of town. It was supposed to be a relaxing Sunday. Good food, family bonding, nothing dramatic. But Afia didn't come to eat. She came with the truth. As she walked through the door, she greeted everyone politely. She even hugged Sifa, who acted like nothing was wrong. But Afia's eyes didn't hold their usual softness. They were steady, focused. She was no longer the quiet one. Sifa had ignored the message, but she was about to learn what it meant. Afia didn't need to shout. She didn't need to fight. All she needed was the right moment. And at that dinner table, with everyone present, That moment would finally arrive, and when it did, the whisper would become a voice no one could silence. It was a bright Sunday afternoon, the kind where everything felt peaceful. The smell of roasted chicken filled the house. Teddy had spent hours in the kitchen, proud to cook for the family. The table was full. Steamed vegetables, rice, sauce, fresh juice. The kids were in the living room, laughing at cartoons. Everyone looked happy, like a perfect family moment. Afia sat quietly, her hands resting on her lap, a small white envelope hidden in her bag. She had practiced this moment in her mind 100 times. But now that it was here, her heart was calm. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't angry. She was ready. People laughed around the table, passing plates, complimenting the food. Sifa was glowing as usual, praising her husband's cooking and throwing in little jokes. She acted like nothing had ever happened, like there had never been a voice note, like Afia hadn't warned her. Afia waited. She let everyone eat. She helped clear the table. And just as Teddy was bringing out dessert, Afia gently stood up and said, "Wait, I didn't bring a cake today." Everyone turned to her. She reached into her bag and pulled out the small white envelope. She placed it right in the center of the table, in front of Sifa. Her voice was steady. "Sifa," she said softly, "I didn't bring dessert. I brought the truth." Sifa's smile froze. The room went quiet. Teddy looked confused. The kids were still in the living room, unaware. Their parents sat in silence, unsure if this was a joke. But Afia wasn't smiling. She pushed the envelope closer. "No more whispers," she said. "Not after what you did." Sifa hesitated, her hand trembling slightly as she reached for the envelope. She opened it slowly, her eyes scanning the first few pages. Then the color drained from her face. Inside were photos, screenshots, messages, hotel receipts, all with the name Zanele, all proof of a secret life. Teddy leaned in and picked up one of the papers. His eyes moved across the lines. His expression changed, confusion, then shock, then something heavier. Sifa tried to speak. "It's not what you think." But her voice cracked. No one said a word, not even Afia. She didn't need to explain anything. She had done what she came to do. She gently kissed her father's forehead, picked up her bag, and walked out of the house without looking back. The silence she left behind was louder than any argument. Afia didn't come to destroy Sifa's world. She just came to stop Sifa from destroying hers. Teddy picked up the envelope slowly, still unsure what was going on. He looked at Sifa, who had gone pale, her fingers frozen beside her glass. Carefully, he opened it and pulled out the papers inside. The first thing he saw was a screenshot, a message from someone saved as Thabo Heart. The words were clear, romantic, personal. Nothing a married woman should be saying to another man. His eyes moved from one message to the next. There were photos too. Sifa at a restaurant, laughing with a man that was not him, holding hands, kissing his cheek. Afia had printed everything clearly. There were even hotel bookings, bank transfers, and flight details, all under the name Zanele. Teddy's face changed as he kept reading, from confusion to hurt to something deeper, disappointment. He didn't speak, he didn't yell, but the pain was written all over him. He was reading proof that the woman he trusted, the woman he built a life with, had been living a secret life behind his back. The room was silent. No one dared to speak. Sifa sat frozen, her hands now gripping the edge of the table. Her eyes darted between the documents and Teddy's face. She finally opened her mouth. "It's not what it looks like," she said, her voice shaking, but even she didn't sound convinced. No one moved, not her parents, not the cousins. Even the children in the next room had turned off the cartoons, sensing something wasn't right. Afia didn't say a word. She had already done what she came to do. She didn't yell. She didn't curse. She simply stood up from her chair, picked up her handbag, and walked to where her father sat. She leaned down and kissed his forehead gently. Then she turned and walked out the front door without looking back. Her steps were calm, but her silence was loud. Sifa stayed seated, her eyes full of panic now, watching her sister leave. She looked back at Teddy, but he wasn't looking at her anymore. He was staring at the last page in the envelope, the hotel receipt dated just 2 weeks ago. Everything Afia had warned her about had come true. Afia didn't need revenge. She didn't need to shout or ruin anyone's life. The truth had done all of that on its own. The envelope spoke louder than any voice ever could. And in that quiet, broken living room, Sifa finally understood. Afia was done protecting her. After Afia left the house, The silence didn't leave with her. It stayed. It grew heavier. Everyone sat in shock, especially Sifa. At first, she just stared at the door. Then, as if waking up from a bad dream, she stood up quickly and ran after her sister. But by the time she reached outside, Afia was already gone. That night, Sifa didn't sleep. She kept checking her phone, hoping for a message. She called Afia once, then again, but it went unanswered. The next day, she showed up at Afia's doorstep. No makeup, eyes swollen from crying. She knocked and knocked until Afia finally opened the door. Sifa stood there, tears rolling down her cheeks. "Please," she whispered. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I was just joking that day. I didn't know it would go this far." Afia looked at her, calm and quiet. She didn't shout. She didn't slam the door, but she didn't smile either. Sifa stepped forward, trying to hug her. "I'm sorry, okay? I made a mistake. You're my sister. We're supposed to protect each other, not do this." Afia gently stopped her with a hand. "Sifa," she said softly, "I didn't do this to hurt you. I did it because you never stopped hurting me." Sifa broke down crying. She blamed stress, blamed the other man, blamed feeling unloved. She said everything except what Afia had waited years to hear, the truth without excuses. But Afia didn't need the excuses anymore. She didn't even need the apology. She had carried the weight of her own mistake for years. Alone, she had been mocked, judged, and pushed aside because of something she had done as a teenager. And yet, she had taken the pain, learned from it, and moved forward quietly. Sifa, on the other hand, had done far worse and hid behind smiles and makeup, pretending to be perfect. Then, when it suited her, she used Afia's past to feel powerful. Afia wasn't angry anymore. She was done being silent. What she wanted was never revenge. She just wanted the truth to stand on its own, not buried, not twisted, not ignored. She looked at her sister one last time and said, "Sometimes, love doesn't mean covering up lies. Sometimes, it means finally saying the truth out loud." Then she closed the door, not out of hate, but out of peace, because for the first time in a long time, Afia finally felt free. Afia didn't tell anyone else in the family what happened. She didn't need to. The truth had already started doing its own work. She didn't send messages, didn't gossip, didn't explain herself. She let silence speak, a silence that was full, powerful, and unshakable. Within 2 weeks, Teddy quietly moved out of the house. No big announcements, just a short message to the family group chat. "Sifa and I are separating. Please respect our privacy." That was all it took. Everyone knew something serious had happened, but no one dared to ask Afia, because deep down, they already knew where the storm had started. At that dinner table, Sifa's perfect image began to fade. She stopped posting pictures. She avoided family calls. The woman who always had the loudest laugh was suddenly the quietest one in the room. But Afia didn't mock her. She didn't celebrate her fall, because it was never about bringing Sifa down. It was always about lifting herself up. Afia focused on her own life. She applied for jobs again, not with fear, but with confidence. This time, when someone asked about her past, she didn't shrink. She answered with truth and strength. And one day, she got the call she'd been waiting for, a job offer from a women's magazine that believed in second chances. She started writing articles, honest, brave, and healing. And then, one day, she shared her own story, anonymously. No names, no revenge. Just a story about a young girl who made a mistake, grew from it, and finally stood up for herself. It went viral. Thousands of women wrote back, thanking her, saying, "That was me," saying, "You gave me courage." Afia smiled quietly behind her screen, not because people finally saw her, but because she finally saw herself. She didn't need to shame her sister. She didn't need to prove anything to the world. She had freed herself from the weight of silence, from the pain of betrayal, from the lie that she wasn't enough. And when someone later asked her in an interview, "Wasn't it hard to expose someone so close to you?" she replied simply, "I didn't expose her. I exposed the truth, and that truth set me free." Afia didn't win by fighting. She won by finally choosing herself.